What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. I'm Bryce, and today I'm going to read in chapter 35 of the Parker Inheritance. Let's begin. Chapter 35, Reginald Bradley, 1957. When Reginald Lawrence Bradley was a child, his grandmother would threaten to pop him with one of her wooden baking spoons anytime he complained about being poor or not having a father or wearing the same pair of jeans day after day after day. "Boy, you're better off than most people," she would say. Later that night, she would slice him an extra thick piece of cornbread with his dinner. His grandmother didn't want to acknowledge it, but Reggie really did have it worse than a lot of his classmates. His mother had run away from home as a teenager, only to return 3 years later with a half-white baby in her arms. She never told anyone who the father was. All Reggie knew was that he lived in New York. His mother promised to take him to Brooklyn to meet his daddy. But when she left home again 5 years later, Reggie remained in Lambert. It took 5 more years for Reggie to accept she was never returning for him. Kids liked to tease Reggie about his mother, about his father, about his tattered clothes and golden skin and funny gray eyes. Reggie responded with his fists. He didn't care if his opponent was bigger or smaller, if it was one boy or a group. He wasn't taking lip from anyone. Coach Dub was the first person to take Reggie's anger and channel it into something positive. He first put Reggie on the football and basketball teams, but the boy got into too many scuffles with his teammates. Reggie tried track next and liked it. He didn't have to work with anyone. He only had to compete against himself and the clock. From there, Coach Dub had him try out for tennis with the racket in his hand, and when he could remember to keep his temper and serve under control, Reggie really thrived. Coach Dub was the best thing that ever happened to Reggie. He gave Reggie structure and purpose, and a means to find personal success. Thanks to Coach Dub, Reggie believed he could be more than just a poor boy from the South. Then he messed everything up by falling in love. To be fair, most of the boys at school were at least a little in love with Siobhan. She was so smart and so kind and extremely easy on the eyes. She never said or did anything that made Reggie feel bad about himself, even when he was sitting at her dining room table, stuffing his face because he didn't know where his next meal would come from. She never laughed at him for wearing the same threadbare clothes. They had only been seeing each other for a year, but it felt like so much longer. Coach Douglas' son had strode into the library like he owned the entire school. Siobhan had given him a word puzzle. Chip didn't know the answer, but Reggie did. His mother used to play word games like that with him before she left. Feeling bold, Reggie left a note at her locker, asking her to meet him in the park, not really expecting her to show up. But she had come, and she kept coming back, and a year later, they were in love. But since her father wouldn't allow her to date, they had to keep their relationship a secret. I don't know why I'm laughing. I don't know, I'm thinking about something. Outside of group functions, they rarely talked to each other at school. They didn't send each other many notes. Whenever Reggie ate a meal at Coach Dub's house, he was sure to sit as far away from her as he could. He didn't tell any of his friends, and neither did she, but eventually Coach Dub discovered their courtship. He responded by kicking Reggie off the tennis team in the middle of the season and threatened to send Siobhan away for her last year of high school. Reggie wanted to run off with her, but Siobhan had always been the smarter of the two, and she wisely turned to him. Reggie didn't believe he had anything to offer her. He was intelligent, but that wouldn't put food on the table. He was kind, especially toward children, but that wouldn't cover the rent. Reggie had no real way to support her, provide for her, protect her. He knew she deserved better than him. Still, he hoped Coach Doug would come around and give Reggie a real opportunity with his daughter. When Coach Douglas approached him about playing in the exhibition game, he thought he finally had his chance. But he didn't. On the night of the game, after they won, Coach Doug shook Reggie's hand, then leaned in and told him to leave his daughter alone. A poor, high yellow, country dumb Negro like you will never be good enough for a little Doug, he said. Ouch. When Reggie saw a car behind the high horse later that night, he foolishly thought that maybe it was Coach Douglas coming to check on the boy's battered ego. Instead, 3 men in masks jumped out of the vehicle. The largest man wielded a knife while the other 2 carried baseball bats. What are basketball bats? Baseball bats. Reggie took off, running down a maze of alleys. His feet stumbling in the darkness, he paused every 2 feet to check a door, hoping to find one unlocked. Finally, he hid behind a row of garbage bins and held his breath. Seconds later, 2 sets of footsteps rushed by. Kneeling lower, Reggie felt around on the ground, looking for anything he could use as a weapon. Taking a chance, he stood and opened one of the garage lids. Inside the bin, sitting on top of the trash, was a broken mop handle. As he picked it up, he heard more footsteps. "Guys, I found them," someone yelled. Reggie took off again, this time heading back to the bar. The owner kept a gun aside. Maybe he could find it. But before he could reach the back door, someone grabbed Reggie by the arm. It was the largest attacker, the one with the knife. He swiped at Reggie, tearing a gash in Reggie's side. The man was too big, with arms that were too long. Reggie waited for the man to swing again, but this time, instead of jumping backward to avoid contact, Reggie stepped forward, allowing the man's forearm, not knife, to make contact with Reggie's side. Clamping his arm down, Reggie pinned the man's hand to his side while stabbing at the man's face with a mop handle. Sounds violent. The stick with its jagged, sharp end sank into his attacker's face, into his eye socket. Jesus. The man screamed. He dropped his knife and pulled away from Reggie, flopping on the ground like a fish, gasping for air. Just flopping like a fish, gasping for air. It's crazy. The man continued to howl as he pressed his hands against his eye. While Reggie stood there trying to decide what to do, the other 2 attackers approached him from behind. One hit him in the leg, while the other went for Reggie's shoulders. The boy fell and covered his head as the men began to strike him with their bats. Then a shotgun blast pierced the air. Reggie's attackers stumbled away from him. They grabbed the large one, still writhing on the ground, and escaped. A few seconds later, Coach Douglas was there, helping Reggie to his feet and dragging him to his car. Reggie's eyesight was blurry and his chest hurt every time he breathed, but he was alive. Coach Douglas took Reggie to Smith's house in the country. An hour or so later, a nurse showed up. She cleaned his wounds and stitched the gashes on the side and forehead. He had 2 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and a sprained wrist. I have dark humor, I'm sorry. "How you feeling, son?" Coach Douglas asked Reggie the next afternoon. Reggie winced as he sat up in the guest bed. "I've had better days. I'm sore all over and my eyes are still a little blurry." "At least you got both of them. Word is Marion Allen was rushed to the hospital last night with a right nasty facial injury. The doctors tried, but they couldn't save his eye." "So it was the Allens," he said. "I figured as much. I just wish I'd gotten Marion's other eye as well." He grimaced as he rubbed his shoulder. "Did they attack the other fellows?" "The boys are fine. We got them out of the city." Coach Douglas hesitated, then sat down beside Reggie. "But they jumped Big Doug. His injuries are a lot worse than yours. Broken jaw, missing teeth. Not sure how many blows he took to the head from those bars." From those bats. Not how many blows he took from the head with those bats. He got blowed in the head with those bats. "Is he at the hospital?" He shook his head. Let me reread that. "Not sure how many blows he took to the head from those bats, baseball bats." "Is he at the hospital?" He shook his head. We thought it go best. We thought it best to go ahead and get him and his family out of town. They're in Maryland, staying with Leanne's sister. For how long? Reggie asked. The thought of being apart from Siobhan hurt worse than his body. Hard to say. Doug wants to come back, but I don't see that happening. The administration at Perkins found out about the exhibition game. I'm not sure he'll have a job waiting for him if he returns. Shoot, I might not even have a job. Wallace has already fired Tommy Turner. Yeah, not Timmy Turner, Tommy Turner. Coach Douglas rubbed his eyes. The sad thing is, I bet Tommy would still have his job if they won. Reggie didn't care at all about the game right then. What about Siobhan? They didn't hurt her, did they? She's fine, Coach Douglas said. But son, you need to forget about her. Like I said, they ain't coming back. It ain't safe for them here anymore. You neither. Not after what you did to Mary and Allen. Are you going to take me to Maryland too? Damn it, boy. Enough about Siobhan. I don't care how bad Doug was whipped. He ain't never going to accept you. Reggie didn't argue. The truth was the truth. He leaned back onto the headboard and let out a long, slow breath. He had done everything Coach Doug asked him to do, even down to intentionally losing points during the match. In Coach's eyes, all Reggie was good for was hitting the ball or running around a track. For a second, he wondered if things would be different if Coach Doug passed away from his injuries. Then he pushed that thought of his head. He hated the man, but he didn't want him dead. It'd be like that sometimes. But why can't Siobhan and Miss Leanne come back? The Allens are mad at me and her daddy, not them. Doesn't Siobhan want to finish up her senior year at Perkins? And Mrs. Leanne is so involved in the church. Coach Douglas looked up at the ceiling and mumbled something to himself. Then leaned in close to Reggie and told him about the doll. It's dark skin and red lipstick, the words etched into it, the noose around his neck. Reggie did not want Enoch Washington dead. He could not say the same about the Allens. So what's the plan? Reggie asked. How do we get them back? He sat up taller and winced. The pain hit his side. When the pain hit his side. I'm not afraid to fight. Don't you understand? It's over. Coach Douglas replied. This isn't another tennis game. This is real life. They won. But we can't. You're just a kid. What? You're going to take on the Allen family? Might as well dig your grave now and dig a grave for your grandma and everyone else you love. He said, the best thing you can do is move away, start over, and live your life. What? Move to Chicago? Detroit? No, I think you should join the military like I did. Reggie laughed. No offense, Coach, but there's a big difference between the way the Army treats you and how they treat me. I know, he said, but it doesn't have to be that way. I don't understand. You will in time. He rose from the edge of the bed. Get dressed. We're leaving tonight. Reggie returned home long enough to grab some clothes and kiss his grandmother goodbye. Then Coach Douglas instructed him to lie down in the back seat until they reached the state line. He had no idea where they were going. A few hours later, they stopped to grab some snacks and use the restroom. Want a Coke? Coach Douglas asked. Reggie frowned. No thanks. Where are we? Georgia. Hopefully we'll make Mississippi by morning. What's there? Patience, son. You don't have to lie down anymore, but you better stay in the back. People don't like to see colored kids riding up front with white folks. They don't. That's real. Coach Douglas found a Negro gospel station outside of Tuscaloosa. He didn't have a great voice, but that didn't stop him from singing along. At one point, he caught Reggie staring at him. What? Didn't think I knew all these hymns? I didn't know white people sang songs like that. They don't. Dawn was beginning to break when they pulled up a large farmhouse. Coach Douglas instructed Reggie to remain in the car. After a few minutes, he returned with an older white woman. What happened to his face? The woman asked. Her stringy brown and gray hair whipped in the wind. liver spots covered her hands. Long story, Coach Douglas said. So what do you think? She looked Reggie up and down. Don't know if Walter'll do it. Let us stay long enough for me to talk to him. We'll hide in a barn. I don't know, Vern. A lot of people will be so. A lot of people will be right surprised if they see you driving around here. What caused issues? What what caused issues for all of us? What even better reason for me to hide out for a while? He replied. Rich is a good kid, Rita. He deserves a chance at a better life. Who was this woman? Reggie wanted to ask. And why did she call Coach Douglas Vern? Go on and pull your car to the back, she said. Walter be home soon. Reggie and Coach Douglas parked farther onto the property, then walked to the barn. The silence was thick enough to slice. Finally, after sitting on a bale of hay, Reggie asked, Now you will tell me what's going on. First, let's get a few things straight, Coach said. I'm about to tell you something that no one knows. Not Chip, not my wife. If you even think about breathing a word of this to anyone. A word of what? I'll be 48 in 3 weeks, Coach Douglas continued. However, according to my birth certificate, I turned 45 in April, long before I was Adam Douglas. I was a kid named Vernon Thompson. Vernon Thompson, that was his name. I'm 3/4 white. The other quarter, Reggie slowly stood. You're colored. He nodded. I grew up around here, lived with my uncle. He liked to knock me around when he was drunk, which was all the time. But it wasn't like I had anywhere else to go. My mama died when I was a baby, and my daddy didn't want anything to do with me. Even though he lived right down the road, only thing I lived for was working with this farm in the summer. This land had belonged to Rita's family for 5 generations. Walter was born in Philadelphia. They met in college up north, and somehow Rita convinced him to move to Mississippi. Walter was never much of a farmer, but he was a good doctor. And thanks to the Quakers, he had some pretty radical notions on how Negroes should be treated. So did Rita. They always hired colored kids to help out for the summer. Paid us and fed us too. It was better than shining shoes. One morning when I was working the farm by myself, a family came looking for Walter and Rita. They were away in the city, so I kept the family company till they got back home. You know what that family told Rita about me? They said, you have such a fine son. He must have gotten all his charm from your side of the family. Adam Douglas slapped his knee. Here's the truth about people. We make a lot of assumptions about each other. People don't think you're colored just because of your skin. They think you're colored because your grandmother is dark skinned and you attend a Negro school and a Negro church and because you're poor. But what if those same people passed you on the street when you were dressed in a sharp suit? What if they met you in a white part of town? What if you were driving a Cadillac instead of walking? What would they see then? That's a good question. Some good questions. What Coach Douglas began to pace. As an old country doctor, Walter dealt with a lot of births and every once in a while, an infant death. It took a while, but Rita eventually convinced him to tweak once. Every once in a while, infant death. It took a while, but Rita eventually convinced him to tweak one of those birth certificates so I could have a new life. And poof, Vernon Thompson died and Adam Douglas was reborn. I can't pretend to be white, Reggie said. It ain't pretending. You become white. You don't fake being white in public, then turn back into a Negro when you're at home. You have to commit all the way. But if you do, think of all the opportunities. I was able to join the military. I learned a real trade, moved up in the ranks, and then I got my degree. You could do the same, but I could never return to Lambert. Maybe you ain't figured it out yet, but you can't go back to Lambert anyway. You took Marion Allen's eye. You think he's just gonna forget that? And why go back in the first place? And Lambert, you'll always be a poor, pitiful Negro. A poor, pitiful Negro. Okay. What about my grandma? Reggie said. His grandmother was all right now, but her health wouldn't hold up forever. I'll watch out for her, Coach Douglas said. Believe me, she wants you to take this opportunity. Reggie picked up a stick and began drawing in the dirt. I don't know, Coach. Coach Douglas grabbed a stick from Reggie and broke it in half. One of the guys from my army company is now the vice president of a bank. Another owns his own law firm, and another is a judge. He stuffed his hands in his pockets. You go to the military and then attend a good school on the GI Bill, and you can do the same. As smart as you are, you could write your own ticket. Have more money than God himself if you wanted it. Coach Douglas stepped out, leaving Reggie to contemplate. Is it contemplate? Yeah, contemplate what he would do if he were rich and powerful. It didn't take long for him to figure it out. Reggie would use his money to impress Siobhan once and for all. He'd provide her with every want. He could already see himself walking up to her while dressed in a crisp army uniform, a grin on his face and a bouquet of roses in his arm. He shook his head. Not an army uniform, but a brand new three-piece suit. His paycheck from his job tucked in his coat pocket, or instead of just working at the office, maybe he would even own the company. But he didn't limit his daydream to Siobhan. He will also get back at the Allens. A single eye wasn't enough to make up for what they did to him and Coach Doug. What they threatened to do to Siobhan, they had to pay. Finally, Reggie stepped out of the barn and found Coach Douglas. I'm in, Reggie said. How do we start? Although it was fairly easy to convince Reggie to go through with the plan, it was much harder to get Walter Hamilton to agree. He would lose his license if he was discovered, but that was the least of his worries. The idea of what those good old boys might do to Rita to exact their revenge made him break into hives. But although Rita was worried, she was almost determined, and finally, after a week of prodding, she convinced Walter to look through his files to find someone who might be a good fit. Meanwhile, Coach Douglas and Reggie worked to create a credible backstory for the person Reggie was to become. Coach Douglas also schooled Reggie on how to pass as white, how to walk with the confidence of a man who could do anything he wanted in this country, how to resist making a scene when someone told a racist joke, how to sit calmly at the front of the bus or walk into a restaurant that was for whites only, how to look white people boldly in the eye and see them as peers, not the enemy, and when necessary, how to put down and further degrade his own people in order to protect his new identity. 2 weeks later, Reggie left Mississippi for Killeen, Texas, where he would be stationed at the Fort Hood Army Base. He'd already had his hair shaved into a low buzz cut to hide his natural curls. Kind of like this, what I got going on. If anyone asked, he was to say he got his tan skin from working outside. When he stepped onto his bus for the trip, he sat at the front like all the other white people. He looked them in the eye, trying to be kind and helpful, and when they asked him his name, he smiled as widely as he could and said, I'm James Parker, pleased to meet you. And that was chapter 35, so tomorrow I'll be reading chapter 36. Chapter 36 tomorrow. And that's about it. Peace out.